brick. Bricks to brick veneer, or brick veneer is to urban straw. There's quite a lot of stigma attached to ordinary bricks. Yet when you isolate a brick out and start thinking about it, its character and its poetic potentials, you can literally sort of open up a brick metaphorically and literally to other possibilities. So this is a project we did for University of Queensland. It's a laboratory project in which we took bricks. Many of them are laid traditionally, but quite a number of them are hand cut with a bolster to turn the split face outward, and we used a couple of different brick types to achieve this this feeling. So one of the ideas running the project was that the interior is a sterile, physically contained laboratory environment, and the outside sits in the real world, the sort of the dirty world of subjectivity. So we wanted the outside to feel like a handmade clay pot, and the inside like a counterpoint to the interior. This outcome was actually layered with some of the thinking from one of the guys in our office called Ashley Payne, who'd been doing a series of self-portraits. So the image on the left of the screen is one of the original line diagrams. They're referred to as self-portraits. They're clearly not literally portraits, but they're indelibly Ashley's own kind of line drawings. And then what Ashley would do is put these drawings through a series of processes, through contemporary processes of pixelation or printing processes, and then he'd see what the impact of these processes was on the original line works. So as a test case, this is a very old project in our practice, we thought it would be very interesting to see what the implication would be of the brickworking trade upon the original line work. So we quite literally then just translated some of that artwork into brickwork. And contrary to popular opinion, this wasn't some sort of random brick smashing fest. It was actually a very precise, disciplined exercise. Every single brick cut was known, every other half of the brick placement was known, and you can see here the technical drawings that were prepared in preparation for the construction. These are the brick types. So we found two bricks that were fantastic together, both in isolation really quite ordinary, but together provided a fantastic richness. And importantly, the centre of each of these bricks is different. Their extrusion processes are different. So you can see the brick on the far right having the large central hole, and the bricks on the left having the smaller central holes. And then there are two brick cut types, one edge cut, and from that you get two kind of conditions. You have a very smooth face and a very, very craggy face. And so then what we set about was figuring out how to begin to lay these bricks to make a very, very rich brick building. Now the reason for this was that this building was to sit into a very, very prosaic institutional environment. So what we were interested in doing was to introduce a rich textured counterpoint to this otherwise dreary, drab brick environment, so the entire precinct could lift itself. Here's the brickies standing around wondering what they've got themselves into. And interestingly, we went through, I think, 2 bricklayers arrived and then went away again, and the third bricklayer was a man who came out of retirement who thought this was a fantastic thing to get involved with. One of the other things that our office really enjoys doing is taking very, very ordinary things. So here's an example of an ordinary brick and starting to study what an ordinary brick can yield. But it's also an ordinary system. So the most ordinary system probably in Queensland is brick veneer construction. So this is stock standard brick veneer construction. And then to be quite faithful to that system, to not think of bricks as heavy, heavy things, but to be faithful to the idea of a brick as a veneer. And so this is like a fragile shell that sits around the outside of this building. One of the other things we're really quite fond of is displaced objects. So there are lots of instances when you walk around houses, public realm, where you see things which, if you think long and hard enough about it, take on different characters. And when this happens, I mean, this reeks of any number of things, from some sort of wonderful DIY inventiveness, some sort of wonderful poetic, like has this man owned this table forever, and he actually gets to where he's going and dismantles it and uses that as a table again. Is it actually a boat that became a table and now it's being used as a boat again? Who knows? So the sort of hybridisation is in many ways fascinating, and we as a practice are always on the lookout for some of these things, because the resonance that exists between physical objects can be used in interesting ways. This is a project we did again for the University of Queensland in one of the rooms in their complex of great court buildings, which is the sandstone kind of centre of the university. Our brief for this was to take this tiered lecture theatre and gut it, basically remove all of the tiered flooring, turn it into a flat floor multifunction lecture theatre, take down the old blue curtains and put up new blue curtains, take down the old fluoro lights, put up new fluoro lights, and then choose loose tables and chairs, much like this stuff, from their standard range of laminate stuff. This is a really interesting room to me because it isn't classifiably heritage. It's not everybody's cup of tea either. But there's something quite endearing about all of the furniture and fitments and things in this space, and yet it was destined for the mini-skip. So when I was in there one day contemplating this quite forlorn idea of stripping the room out and binning it, this idea came to us that the desks themselves were almost exactly the same size and proportion as the windows. So we set upon this idea. You can see on the left of screen the desk as a desk, and on the right of screen the desk as a curtain. So we found this way then of enabling this idea to take over the entire project. So desks became curtains, floor became desks, the chairs became acoustic ceiling panels for their absorptive qualities. We then retained the old chalkboard, we retained the old painted datum, retained the old chains that held up the fluoro lights and so on. Now this wasn't really an exercise in recycling in terms of any green agenda, or even recycling, well, for any other reason than through some sort of nostalgic, sentimental quality, because the room had this fantastic lived-in, aged feeling. So here you can see the outcome, which is the floor, the hardwood floor is desk, and the desks themselves used as curtains. So all of the desks sit on runners and they run around the room, and so they're more like shutters than curtains actually. And there's this vague, when you stand there in the room and survey the scene, there's something vaguely familiar about these desks that are on the walls, but it's still a little hard to quite imagine where they might have come from. And in their open position, the light that comes in from these windows glances across the surface of the desks, and there are decades and decades of wonderful graffiti, some of which can't be said in this room. But there's one here, I don't know if you can read it there, it says "Question everything." This used to be a science lab, and someone's responded under that "why," which is quite a fantastic end observation to this project, this dual sort of compliance and defiance. So the word "why" is both compliant and defiant of the original statement. And I think this is something that we come across as architects all the time, is what we choose to comply with and what we choose to defy. And sometimes it's fantastic in terms of navigating a path in architecture if you can do both simultaneously. And here's an example of just that. These are the characters from the 60s TV show The Time Tunnel, and obviously this space they're standing in is fictitious, the ability to travel in time and space, and if only we could figure out a way of, as architects, of making this possible. But it's fun and interesting sometimes to think of the Building Code of Australia implications on a room like this, and the kind of escape provisions and so on. Often in our work, what we come up against, particularly in refurbishment work, is situations where things, building elements are just horrible. And one of the classic cases of this is gun barrel corridors running down the centre of institutional buildings. So one of the things that we often resort to as architects is the kind of hyping, or taking really prosaic things and hyping them to the extent that the reprehensible actually becomes humorous or fantastic somehow. So whilst this is a photo montage, this isn't. Sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. This is a woman who works at the University of Queensland, standing in this corridor, having her wedding photos taken, and this is the reality. So this is a corridor in a chemistry building, and so quite straightforward. The gun barrel corridor was unavoidable, and so what we did was painted and lined the wall ceiling with concentric lines to make this a really fantastic kind of optically engaging environment to be in. You can see in the distance the fire escape door is painted with concentric rectangles as well to extend the perception of space through the escape door and out the other side. And I think quite interestingly what happens when you stand dead centre, the perspective is true, and then when you move off centre, space appears to bend at the location of the doorway. You can see littered along the length of the doorway, you get glimpses into these laboratory spaces. You can see the flasks and so on the left of that one, office space in these kind of environments. So this is quite common in our practices work, is to try to instill things with some sense of humour, something highly visually engaging, something where people get out of a lift and really love walking down that corridor for some reason or other. Some of you, I don't know, maybe the particular year I took for a tour of Girls Grammar School are no longer here. Chris, oh yes, a few people. A lot of the work that we do also tries to be open to broad interpretation. So this is the west wall of Brisbane Girls Grammar School Creative Learning Centre, and we've been asked. So that's a 6-storey building. It's not a 6-storey woman, it's a 6-storey building with a woman photo montaged into the front of it. Quite coincidentally, at the time the building was built, this appeared in the David Jones catalogue. And we've been asked a lot of times how this facade came to be. Is it based on pop art? Is it based on some fascination with fabrics? Is it based on some... We've even been asked if there's any Indigenous connotations behind some of the patination in this wall. And in fact, it's none of the above. The way this pattern came to be was because we were quite obsessed with the context of this project being the context of movement. What we look for frequently is situations in projects where we move past a physical context. So we might move past the fact that it's on a highway or surrounded with concrete to the fact that it's a context of movement, people in motion. So what we were then led to was an idea of being obsessed with moire being interference patterns, so 2 layers of material which appear to move but only because the viewer is moving. So this is another optical kind of optical idea. So this is the context of the project. Brisbane Grammar School adjacent, so these boys running around at lunchtime playing football, soccer and whatever, people in motion experiencing this sort of pulsating facade, and also the inner city bypass, people at 80 kilometres per hour for about an 8-second stretch who get the experience of this building that has this pulsating quality. So this was just simply trying to address the public realm in an engaging way, and also trying to understand how you might build a 6-storey high, approximately 50 metre long facade that is the same all over, but is a highly engaging kind of outcome for those people around it. We've had a lot of people confused about what makes this work. In terms of, we've been asked where the motors are kept and whether it's solar powered, that kind of thing. Most of our work is cheap, quite cheap. This is actually the reality of that wall is a fibro inner surface painted with black and white stripes and an aluminium sunscreen with gaps, and it's the ever so slightly offset angle between the sunscreen and the painted stripes of the inner wall that cause the interference pattern. Now this isn't a screen and a fibro wall for the sake of having a screen and a fibro wall. This is a west-facing screen, so having a lightweight wall with a sunshade outside of it in our climate is an absolute necessity. So once those pragmatics were already established, then how you go about detailing a wall and a screen beyond it became the main agenda. So this highly repetitive, highly kind of optically engaging outcome was a reasonably economical thing to achieve. That's only half of the building. This is the building, so it's a 6-storey high usable space with 2 stories of basement parking underneath it, and you can see the way that it nests itself into the site. You can see the diagonal line that runs through the building is a response to the heritage listed main building on the left of screen. Now the heritage listed main building is this wonderfully symmetrical, formal building of the late 1800s, and what we were interested in doing is, again, not thinking necessarily about the physical context of the main building and the axis of symmetry as an axis that describes physicality, but it as an axis that describes choreographed people movement. So people walking through the front door of the school building and out the back door of the school building, right on this axis of symmetry. And so that diagonal line that you see running through is actually right on that passage through the building. So when you actually drop down into the school, you see the structure of the building gathered up into this colonnade, and so this is quite literally a day in the life, people walking the bridge out to this building on a daily basis. Once you get across the bridge, this is a mashup between an Escher drawing and the reality of what this space is actually like. We, in thinking about how to design the social spaces of this building, what we were mostly interested in was facilitating very, very direct movement and very, very direct socialisation and movement between places, as well as high levels of visual connectivity. And the reason for this is the spaces you see in the background, they're the spaces for relatively structured learning, and this was really trying to be the counterpoint to that. So moving between structured learning and social or unstructured learning quite fluidly. And in this particular case, what this Escher-like or ant colony or Hogwarts-like outcome was really the result of tracing these lines of least resistance three-dimensionally through space, so connecting balcony to balcony and so on. So we put stairs literally where they were most useful to keep people out of lifts. Now what happens, I think, what the other point to this was to try to build a really memorable three-dimensional environment which captures the imaginations of its occupants. And you'll just have to bear with me. Not Hall & Oates isn't everybody's cup of tea, but this the students were allowed to make their own DVD for the 135th anniversary birthday of the school. And this is a fragment from the DVD they made and you'll have to just bear with the music till the end because there's actually a point to this. But really this DVD is just trying to illustrate how these students have really come to own this three-dimensional matrix of space and have really done some wonderful things in it. So they choreographed this whole thing themselves. So I guess what that DVD is really trying to illustrate is something to do with how we work frequently, is to try to be very, very pragmatic in the first instance, to do with how you connect things and how you might thread people through space, but know reasonably well how this might unfold in a more poetic kind of fashion and enable other people to then start owning the space and working with it in their own way.